I'm Godiva, and today we'll be making a Viking style hood with quilting tools and techniques. The first thing we're going to do is square up the raw-ish edge of our linen relative to the selvage. And there's a special way to cut linen that only works basically for the very loose woven but strong fibered linen. It won't work so well even for linen blends. So first we make a cut, and then we take out one thread, and we go along making a gather. We're not trying to break the gather, but it will eventually break, and then there will be a visible line that we can cut along. Okay, now it's broken, and if we smooth it back out, you probably can't see on camera, but I can see there's a dark line where there's a thread missing. So I'm just going to cut along there until I get to the point where that thread appears again, and I'll have to try and draw it back out or draw out a thread next to it. Okay, I cut one edge, and I'm gonna make my panels 25 by 15 and 12 by 12, which should make a medium-sized hood. So I'm gonna measure 15 inches and do the same thing. Okay, I'm now going to sew our panels together using some cotton thread. You can look up any tutorial for how to make one of these hoods and it'll tell you, but I'm not going to, one thing is that I'm not going to sew up to this very end. I'm just going to sew up to about here, and then the other panel will be sewn along this way. I'm also going to be using 1/2 inch, well actually full inch seam allowances. I have this little magnet that's handy for sewing a particular seam allowance, so we've got that there so we can sew 1 inch. I also misspoke earlier. We're actually going to be sewing to about 1 inch out, not so close as this. That would be if we were having a smaller seam allowance. Alright, so the hood is assembled. The face opening is actually a little bit small, so I would have made this part longer if I could do it again, but my partner says this is fine. So what we're going to do now is to deal with the seams on the inside. So I'm going to press these open and then press the edges under. So in order to press these, I'm also going to be using Best Press. So that is something used in quilting, and it'll make the edges nice and crisp and stay down, so we won't have to fight too much with that. So with this particular embroidery thread, I'm going to put a dab of glue because it's very silky and it wants to unravel really easily. And then starting anywhere, I'm going to kind of hide the tail inside. And then just start doing our running stitch. Like so. Although I think I have to change out this needle for a thinner one. And then on the other side we'll have something like that. I also have some fray check somewhere that I'm maybe going to apply to the edges after I've ironed them. So we've cleaned up the seams on our garment so far, and now it's time to do a binding at the bottom. The usual way to do this would be a facing, but I thought we would do something different. We're actually going to do a quilt style binding in case that's easier for anyone for a particular application. And I think it'll work well here because I'm going to be using this stiff canvas as an interfacing type layer to make the edges lie smoother after it's been washed. So we're going to do a quilt style binding, which is more like having 2 layers. We're going to sandwich the canvas in between the 2 layers, sew onto the bottom, and then they both flip upward. And I figure we might as well make this bias cut, although we could probably get away with having a straight grain binding. So to start off with the bias cut, we're going to take this quilting ruler that has a handy 45-degree line, and then let's see, line that up along the straight grain so it starts over here like this. So I use a rotary cutter with a titanium blade. I don't know where that one is, so I'm now going to use one with a steel blade that's a little dull, just until I find the good one. So we're going to start out by cutting along here. And then continue the line like this. And then we're going to cut more parallel lines and join these pieces together. So to cut fabric straight, we already have a straight-ish line. We're going to put the line that we want on the ends, 3 inches, and then we're gonna scooch down bit by bit down to 3 inches. It's really easy to do this on this like lightweight lawn cloth. It can be a little bit difficult to see when you're using like black cotton, so that's why I'm showing you with this. Okay, and now we're just gonna cut it, keeping pressure where we're cutting and moving our hand along as we go. And then with this fabric, it'll be pretty easy, but there might be a few little places that catch. And you want to have the fabric you're going to use under the ruler in case there's places where you go off a little bit like here. So that's on the part we're not using right now. And this end wasn't square in the first place, so we're going to square that now. So I'm making 1.5 inch strips of the canvas, 4-inch strips of the black fabric, and I'm piecing together some parts of the black fabric just to get a little more fabric out of it. Don't bother squaring the ends at this step. Okay, so now we're going to pin our pieces together in preparation for sewing. You can iron a crease in the middle before or after you do this, whatever is easiest for you. So I'm going to since a lot of my corners are on a slant like this, I'm going to kind of try and match up that slant while also keeping the inner edge square. And we're going to go sewing from one end to another, and we're going to keep doing that, keep having these diagonal seams. The purpose of the diagonal seam is that it cuts down mass as compared to a straight seam, because it's kind of distributed along this longer side, the hypotenuse. So it's a good idea to also baste and then sew if you're not confident in this, because it's really easy to mess up and put the ends on one side, and then when you get to the other side over here and do it again, you'll accidentally put the next seam like facing the other way. So I'm just going to start by pinning this together. We're going to go to the machine and sew it. Okay, I've got my needle right near the corner there. I'm trying to kind of line up the other corner in the path. It's okay if my line isn't perfectly straight, but you do want it to be straight enough so it doesn't look weird when you fold this back out. So I'm going to baste this and then get back to you. Okay, I think this looks fine. So I've opened it out. We can see there's these corners at top and bottom. We can trim those. And we're gonna just keep on doing this. I'm gonna go back and use a smaller stitch and back stitch so it's not just basted. And then I'm going to sandwich our yellow canvas in between these layers. When you're doing this, make sure that you're opening up the hypotenuse seam. In fact, this one I'll iron slightly. That way we're reducing bulk. Okay, so we're going to start somewhere in the middle of the wrong side of our hood. Putting the binding on, we're gonna open it up and sandwich in our canvas, putting it along the fold of our binding. And then we're gonna start pinning it. Eventually when we sew this, we're not gonna start right at the end here. We're gonna start maybe around here or so, because we need some space to join up the beginning with the end of the binding. I'm also joining the canvas together at certain places with a simple overlap. And now once we get towards the corner, I'm actually going to cut the canvas at a diagonal. It doesn't have to be with pinking scissors, that's just what I have here. We don't want to have too much bulk right in the corner. Okay, so this is the end result we want with this corner up. I think I actually had it inside out when I showed it to you before, so be careful of that and baste first. I've clipped the corner here, so when we eventually turn it right side out, we're just going to turn it like this. Try and get that corner nice as you can, and we'll just be left with something that looks like that. So we're just now going to take our canvas, put that back inside like that, and just continue on sewing. So we're now at the end. One thing I forgot to mention is that an invisible or transparent foot can be useful when you're doing the corners, so you can see what you're doing more easily. At this end, I haven't left myself enough room, but it's okay. I'm just going to, going at a 45-degree angle, join the part I'm working on to the beginning, but I'm just gonna join it to the whole beginning, not just half of it like I otherwise would. And then after I've sewn this, I'm just going to flip this first part over and just sew it like that. So that should work out okay. Okay, so here's where we're at. It's all sewed down. We're gonna flip this, and then we're going to flip this up like this, but we're going to understitch. So having this spread out right side up, we're just gonna stitch along here. And then when we get to the corners, I'm probably gonna end up just having to flip these inside out, poke out that corner, and then stitch over the top. So here's one finished corner. On the other one, I'm going to be clipping this flat, clipping this edge, and then pushing the remains down flat before I turn it out. Okay, we're now going to hand embroider a pattern onto here. We could do this by machine with satin stitch instead, but sometimes hand sewing is fun. Okay, so we're almost done embroidering this diamond pattern on our binding. There's a few things of note. One is that I actually ended up using a pair of pliers at times to pull the needle up through the fabric like so. This can result in a bend in your needle, but your needle can get damaged just sewing through heavy fabric like this anyway. The other thing is that I ended up alternating back stitches and forward stitches. So the normal way to do embroidery is to back stitch. The way that works is from underneath, we put in our needle at the end of where we're planning to sew. Pull it through, put it backwards, pull it in, and then continue. So the next place would be over here. But I've been running low on this thread, and I'll have to go a few towns over to get more. So instead of just doing that, instead of going up through here, I've actually been going up through this part. And then going forward. This is a little more tricky to get right, but it results in less thread usage, and it actually results in a different look on the back side. So the regular back stitch will look like something like that, whereas what I've been doing looks like that. And I feel like this is actually better because this seems like it's less likely to get snagged on something. So once we're done with that, we need to do something about where the face hole is. And I'm thinking of maybe just taking it easy on myself and doing a simple bias tape thinner than this, and then make smaller diamonds in it. So that'll be a little easier, I think, and create more visual interest because it's like a smaller version of the hem. Okay, so I've made bias tape and clipped it on. The clips are nice when you're sewing something on an edge. And on the bottom corner, I've just kind of folded the bias tape around into a shape that I think will work. So I'm gonna baste all of this down and then stitch diamonds on it. Okay, so our bias tape face hole opening is done. It does look a little funky at the tip, but I think that gives it character. And there's a philosophy in Persian rug making that all rugs should have an imperfection by accident or on purpose because only God is perfect. And that's a useful philosophy for me to have because nothing I make is ever perfect. Okay, I'm now going to sketch out a Celtic knot on this sew-in interfacing. Alright, so at the time I had decided that these were too small to be worth cutting out. I'm now thinking that that might not have been the right choice, but I mean, these are very fiddly and these are only a little bit smaller, so I don't know. We have to draw the line somewhere. What I could do is maybe put some linen on top of these pieces. I'll have to think about it. So I've decided to just try gluing on pieces of cotton twill. This might not work, it might fray too much, but that's something I guess we'll find out in time.
All the poles go into one category.
So I guess let's say poles. Let's go poles line up on one side.